Good morning, everybody. Welcome to NeoSystems Coffee Break series on NeoFlow. It's our standardized, pre-built best practice workflow solution that builds on NeoSystems' expertise in system integration through the Integrify workflow tool. From back in mid-July all the way through to mid-September, we'll be discussing each of the 9 workflow applications that the NeoSystems BPI team has developed. In case you can't attend any of the other sessions, be sure to be on the lookout for the recordings through our website. We have covered already payables, billing, vendor maintenance. Today, we're going to be covering vendor ratings, and then we'll move on next week and every Tuesday thereafter until we reach the end. We're going to cover employee management, journal entry approval, financial statement approval, employee workforce, and also travel authorization. My name's Marty Herbert. I am the practice lead for the BPI team at NeoSystems. Today, we're joined by Scott Goldschmidt, who we're going to mix it up a little bit today, and we're actually going to have Scott asking the questions and me answering, since I was the primary developer on this. As with all of our sessions, if you do have any questions, be sure to post those in the Q&A section, and we'll go ahead and get started. Go ahead, Scott.
Right. Thanks, Marty. So as our audience is learning, NeoFlow is all about standardizing processes. Each flow provides a great baseline of best practice tasks to use as is out of the box, or to configure further to handle those specific items that you give or that give them the most problems. So we get asked a lot about what we call the big 3, payables, procurement, and billing. Payables and billing, we've talked about over the last 2 weeks. And if anyone here is listening and has missed it, payables and billing can be found over on our website. So go check it out when you have a chance. And all right, so we're going to jump right in here, Marty. Vendor rating. So what can you tell our audience about the user's experience in the vendor rating workflow? Is it time consuming or is it complicated?
Vendor rating is, it's funny, whenever we were first asked about it, it was really part of a bigger, complex process. And what it came down to was, when you go to Amazon, you have a little star, right? You got to click the button to say, how great was this? So it's not time consuming, it's not complicated. Really, from a user perspective, it really is just about, checking the box, making sure that you give a rating or maybe no rating, and just kind of build up what becomes an average rating for that particular vendor for that particular transaction. So whether it's timeliness or whatever you're rating them on, it really just becomes about what do you think? And that's really true of any vendor rating system anyway. And what we found when we were originally talking about it was, we needed to make it as simple as possible.
Right. So speaking of being as simple as possible, who can start this process? If it's super simple, is it trusted with everyone, or is it limited to anybody?
A lot of it depends, but in a lot of cases, anybody is really looking at, is really looking at making a purchase in a lot of our clients. So anybody who needs to have access to it can. In some cases, like I mentioned before, it's part of a bigger procurement process and those types of things, or maybe even during goods receipt. We built processes for that we kind of tack on the vendor rating process, where we pull in, whoever is the person receiving the goods, or whoever is the one that is managing that vendor relationship on a regular basis. And it could be billing, because maybe it's a billing issue that's happening and they need to, kind of ad hoc add a rating to this vendor that says, hey, look, we're just not getting things timely, and therefore we're not able to then move these goods along, that kind of thing. So it really could be everybody or anybody. It's really those who are most involved with that vendor who have the best knowledge with the process.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you bring that up. That might be during procurement, or it might be during billing, that you're experiencing, something with a vendor where you feel like you might need to express that or to make a note of that Are there any specific workflows or NeoFlow workflows that you can think of that would tie really well into the vendor rating sub process? Like once vendor, once you deal with the vendor, what kind of workflows here are we dealing with vendors where you want to provide a rating?
Yeah, so a lot of it depends on kind of what the overall setup is. We don't yet have a NeoFlow for procurement, but we're working on one. But procurement is really a good one. That because that's really where things are happening the most. You're getting, in a lot of cases, you're getting quotes on the front end. Those quotes then have some kind of a rating assessment going on to figure out which of the three do we want to accept. So you may be rating vendors during that process. So it becomes an offshoot of that. It could be, like I said before, during goods receipt. Goods receipt, again, it hasn't been standardized to be a NeoFlow yet, but also one that is in our pipeline for creation. And those two processes in particular, because they're part of that procurement cycle, they really tie in very well to vendors. And then, of course, on the payable side, right? On the payable side, then a lot of the time, with a lot of our clients, they're not discovering issues with vendors until it comes time for payment. Because all of a sudden, again, depending on how robust their procurement process is, you may run into a situation where you get a bill from a vendor and you go out to PM, approver, whoever in that payables process, like we talked about before, and the approver goes, no, this was horrible. We can't accept this, or they didn't actually provide that many hours, or there's all of these different things that could have happened, especially when you're dealing with service vendors. Service vendors, you don't have that tangible good. So it becomes harder to capture how do we rate them or when do we rate them. So especially during that payables process, when somebody is looking at the bill, looking at whatever it is we're supposed to be paying for, and they're now making a de facto rating of what happened with that vendor. And the problem is, a lot of the time, it's just captured up here. It's captured in their head. Maybe they're jotting it down, don't ever work with so-and-so again, but they're
Right.
not they're not capturing the data. They're not actually rating it in a way that anybody else at that client may be able to reuse. So it becomes institutional knowledge that gets lost very easily throughout those processes.
Right. So talk a little more about institutional knowledge and, what value does this process have? We know, maybe why you'd want to leave a rating if you had a really good experience, but, what kind of value does that bring?
Well, and a lot of it comes down to, people are doing their jobs, and they're out there doing the best they can with the vendors that are available. I mean, good vendors are hard to find. Bad vendors are also hard to find, because nobody's captured, because there's not a place, because again, NeoFlows are all about connecting to Costpoint, and there's not a place in Costpoint to have a rating, except for because of this process. Part of us building this process involved us talking to the tech team, getting them involved with actually building an extensibility that comes packaged with this NeoFlow that actually puts right on the Costpoint screen what the vendor rating is. So it's about sharing data so that we can easily find the good vendors and the bad vendors. It becomes reportable data, both in the Integrify system where NeoFlows reside, but also now in Costpoint too. So those two things, the combination of the extension in Costpoint, that extra field, and this vendor rating system that feeds that field based on that vendor ID, now makes it that much easier to be able to have everybody on the same page. Because again, people are just doing their jobs. They go out, they pull up the first vendor they find in the list. Great, we want to use them. Do you know how good they were last time? Maybe that's the one that didn't deliver, or maybe that's the one who just went ghost, and we don't know that. But here we are getting ready to create another PO, another subcontract, another agreement with this vendor who doesn't really deserve our business.
Right, and you can even, I mean, if it's a data point, then you can even tie that into some of the reports that you're pulling in, right? Who are your most expensive vendors, or who are your best vendors, or which vendor are you using the most? And you can pull in that rating alongside with those additional reports, so you have maybe a little extra to learn about them, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, the more data points you have, and I mean, and this one, this process in particular, we've built it to capture timeliness, price, quality, and customer service. Those are really the four that, as we've dealt with numerous clients, with how they kind of envisioned talking about their vendors, we said, those are the four that are going to be the most common. With those four areas, not only do you have the ability to establish an average rating for, again, it's a transactional model, but you have the ability to capture it transactionally for how they did for that particular transaction, but also in the system over in Costpoint, it's showing the average of the average. And when we then pull it back into any other process, so any other NeoFlow, again, thinking about a procurement type of process that we may build in Integrify, anything like that, where you pull up vendor data that now has this associated rating, you now have an overall average and the ability to drill down into, okay, again, it's the Amazon model, right? You look at all the
Right.
5 stars, and there's a lot of them, but then you always want to see, why did somebody rate them 1 star, right? So having the additional data, having the additional notes, because there are notes associated with each of these, you then see, would not recommend, never delivered my mattress, that kind of thing. So, you get the information that matters transactionally, as well as at an overarching level for that vendor.
Okay, so we already know that there's a lot of value associated with this workflow, because all that additional data that we have on that vendor provides additional value to your business. How long does it take to implement the vendor rating workflow?
The hardest part is the extension. So I mean, it's a day really. The process is quite literally 3 steps. It is a form along with some notifications and statuses. It's really about building that extension and connecting the two in Costpoint. And even the extension is already pre-built. It's ready to go. And the code associated with that is just a matter of gaining access. It's more of a timeline than a time thing. So who can get access and when. So, but yeah, with any of these NeoFlows, we just kind of go with under a week for any of them, really. And that's usually timeline, not time frame too. So it makes it super easy to start capturing that data, because there's so much value in that data that the sooner you start using it, the better. So when we can find the data sooner, when we can capture the data sooner, getting somebody up and running on even just something as simple as vendor management vendor rating, really pays off very quickly in the contracts that you do and the contracts that you don't make. So time really becomes of the essence when dealing with this, especially the way that we're working now. The more that we are disconnected from offices, the less we get the cross chatting. So it's interesting that we're having these conversations right now about NeoFlows, and here we are also experiencing the less chatter in the office to give us the, hey, vendor rating, this is what I think of that vendor. Now having somewhere to capture that and codify that makes it a lot easier. So again, time really becomes critical to get it up and running.
Yeah, I would agree. So I think we've pretty much covered everything there is about this workflow. Unless there was anything else that you wanted to add, is there anything additional our audience should be aware of when it comes to the importance of vendor rating, or the setup, or what additional value it brings?
Yeah, it on the whole list, it is the simplest, easiest, quickest process, both to do from a user perspective and also for us to get up and running within the Integrify tool. And I would say that, you know, really probably the one thing that, you know, that we didn't talk about is you know, yes, we mentioned institutional knowledge, but we think about this, you know, the shift that is happening. I mean, I've seen a lot of attrition across clients, across, you know, across companies everywhere. You know, you're reading articles about people moving on and moving around, and with them goes that knowledge. So anywhere, any of the NeoFlows in general, where we can capture process and know that it's happening the same way every time, or especially with vendor ratings, having that knowledge to say, hey, look, we know exactly how this vendor has treated us in the past. Having that knowledge and having that captured in a way that lets us look at it historically and look at it as we continue to move forward, definitely is going to pay huge dividends in the long run. And, you know, and again, knowing which vendors to go to and which ones not to go to. So that's really the key of it all.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. Don, do we want to see if we have any questions from our panelists today?
Yeah, it appears that there's no questions at this time, Scott.
Okay. All right. Otherwise, I'd like to invite everyone else back to our next coffee talk next Tuesday. And I wish everyone a great and productive day. Thank you, everyone.